Oh, I like how you responded. I think I've said this before, that when I was at Catholic school growing up, that when one of the nuns walked in the room and said good morning, everyone had to stand up and say, "Good morning, Sister Margaret." So I feel I'm blessed that you all say good morning back to me. Thank you for that. I feel like a nun for one brief second. So I think probably first thing to do is we'll go through and have everyone introduce themselves. And I believe, based on my count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we have a quorum. So we'll go around from the end with Sarah and have everyone introduce themselves, and then we can get started. Your mic's not on, Sarah.
Sorry. Sarah Mason from the California State Senate Committee on Business Professions and Economic Development on behalf of State Senator Jerry Hill.
Megumi Tsutsui.
Joseph Holt.
Margaret Ryder, Consumer Representative.
Kate Lee Carey, Chair and Institutional Representative.
Michael Marion, Bureau Chief for Bureau for Private Postsecondary Education.
Amina Hamilton, Legal Counsel for the Bureau.
Christy Shield, Counsel for the Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
Hi, Kevin Powers with the...
David Weiss with Asher College, institutional member.
Diana Maya, public member.
All right. Good morning, everybody. The first item on the agenda is public comment on any items not on the agenda. So if anybody has anything and they'd like to come forward, now is your chance. All right, then. No public comments of items not on the agenda. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is review and approval of the May 15th, 2018 Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts, edits?
A few minor edits, which are hardly worth mentioning here, but page 2, agenda item 2, I think the name of that organization is the Institute for College Access and Success. The word access is left out. A couple of other typos. On page 7, the third full paragraph down, there's something kind of messed up in that first sentence, I think. Maybe an extra is.
Which paragraph are you on, Margaret?
Third full paragraph down on page 7, it says, Ms. Ryder asked what information about is OSAR is being sent out.
If.
Our is. 2 is's. Only need 1.
Yeah. And on page 11, the second to the last paragraph, the word of in the first line I think should be or. Ms. Tsutsui asked if the payment cap was for the monthly payments or the overall amount. And then one other comment, and this is my recollection, I may be wrong, but I had thought that when there was a suggestion for future agenda items that I had asked for being provided a sampling of unsubstantiated complaints. I may have just done that in relation to the report, but I just mentioned that here. And the other thing is, I thought I had also asked about being provided, having a discussion about the concern that the Bureau does not seem to be the leader in bringing bad institutions to halt. It seems to be that lead is taken on by the Attorneys General, the federal department, so on, and I had asked for a discussion. Again, I don't remember precisely whether I said specifically put it on the agenda, please, or not, so I'm fine if that doesn't get changed, but I thought that's what I'd done.
Does anybody else have any comments, concerns about the minutes?
So if you want to check have the staff check the video on this and see if those comments need to be added. You could move to table this item for another meeting. Up to you. I mean, you could approve it with the amendments as mentioned by Ms. Ryder, or you could move to table it for a future meeting to have staff check, determine whether those comments need to be added.
I'm fine to go ahead without that. I mean, it doesn't have a whole lot of significance whether it's included or not, unless somebody says, well, you never raised that, but I'm not concerned about that. So just those typos need to be corrected.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes with the edits as Margaret provided.
So moved.
Thank you, Joseph. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you, David. All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Yes.
All right, looks like we have unanimous consent and one abstention probably. Oh, you guys aren't voting members, right? Yeah, so doesn't matter. Okay, we're good. Approved as edited. Thank you, everybody, for your input. Okay. Next up, item 4, remarks by the representative of the DCA. Good morning, Dean.
Morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. Chair, Writer, Dr. Marion, members, and for providing me the opportunity to provide a brief department update for the Bureau of Private Postsecondary. First and foremost, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Marion on his great accomplishment yesterday, getting
Congratulations, Dr. Marion.
applause is appropriate for him. I've gone through confirmation myself, very familiar with the rigors of it, as you, the Senate is always, and the legislature for that matter, is very much involved in involved and engaged in that confirmation process. How serious and thoughtful you take. At the arguably short time that both you and I have. It's been joy for me to see very much forward to seeing how this back to the directors teleconference and quarterly meeting. Past June 25, I hosted my first board member and advisory committee teleconference. We had over 30 participants in that call, which included board presidents, vice presidents, chairs, vice chairs, and some advisory committee members. During the call, DCA provided updates on programs and some regulatory process improvements. With the initial success of the teleconference, we plan to host another one at the end of this calendar year. Please be on the lookout for a meeting date. I look forward for participation. I recognize everybody's time is very, very valuable, so we do, in fact, by design, make sure to not have trying to identify the sweet spot for board and bureau leadership. And as mentioned, quarterly, twice. Call hour and a half, including we are providing ample opportunity. 7 entities under DC. Last week on August 6th was the directors' quarterly meeting. The meeting included Department of General Services, DCA office, and DCA. DGS provided their plan for new construction. The Equal Employment Opportunity Office provided on implicit bias. Dr. Marion, appreciate your comments during that agenda. The phenomenon that I first became familiar with. Bias obviously permeates law enforcement, arguably entities. I felt after a conversation that executive staff had on the issue, felt the potential for, similar to, you know, all the prior trainings that many of you have to go through, considering whether or not implicit bias training falling prey to an implicit bias. The Office of Human Resources shared some new improvements on human resources processes, actions. This is one of the many examples where DCA is always trying to assess, tweak, provide better services to always be asking whether or not that tweak, those changes did in fact achieve. Hopefully they in fact will, but if not, I'm going to. Next director's quarterly meeting was scheduled for October 29.
Dean, can you lean into the microphone a little bit? There's a couple people in the audience who are doing a little bit of this.
Will do. I
Thank
apologize.
you.
Specific to licensing and enforcement work groups. The licensing and enforcement work groups continue to meet monthly to discuss specific ideas to innovate in areas of licensing and enforcement, whether through process efficiencies or program collaboration. This month, the licensing work group discussed a tool for streamlining correspondences through the Quality Business Intelligence Reporting Tool, also known as QBERT. This tool is currently available to Breeze programs and will soon be available to all programs in DCA. Thank you to the Bureau for continuing to send your licensing enforcement staff to these meetings and contributing to the dialogue. As many of you may have heard me say before, licensing and enforcement is the blocking and tackling for DCA programs, and the stronger that we are in those respects, I think that just bodes well for not only BPPE but all of DCA and naturally consumers. Importantly, specific to DCA leadership and training, the department's Future Leadership Development Program will kick off its second cohort this September. DCA reviewed 48 applications during the recruitment process. We hope to have representation from the Bureau in this cohort and hope that the Bureau encourages its emerging leaders to apply for this program in the future. So I believe it's so important for BPPE and DCA that we're intentional toward building our bench of leaders. Grand scheme of things, you know, our time in our specific role is arguably a very, very short amount of time. And so important that we're mindful of obviously not only helping, you know, consumers during our time here, but being intentional about looking kind of four generations forward in this regard. I think the Future Leadership Development Program is a piece of that, and I encourage BPPE to continue to identify its On that note, that concludes the department update. As always, if the department can be of service to the Bureau, you know exactly where to get a hold. The partnership, diligent work.
Have any questions?
I had just one question. I may have missed in the meeting materials in advance, but I don't see otherwise an update on the information systems, which are being, as you know, improved for the work of the Bureau. Could you provide any update on that?
So I will provide my understanding. I know Dr. Marin will be able to probably provide even more so given his role, his and his staff's role with our Office of Information Services. My understanding is they've done the extensive work with kind of the first phase of it. I believe that includes a lot of process mapping. I think we're about on the verge of going to phase 2.
Actually, we are already in phase 2. And Robert Bales will give a report on that and give an update on the interviews that we've been having take place.
Maybe I'm very biased in what I'm about to say. My understanding is going very smoothly for BPPE. I know that it's been an issue. But the fact that, yeah, you're quickly into stage 2.
Is that an implicit bias or explicit?
Fair point. Date for today, that was a definite.
I do have to say the implicit bias training that happened at DCA was great, and I recommend any of our institutions or organizations, if you haven't done that training, I recommend you definitely do it. I plan to actually bring it to our chiefs and managers training coming up in September, so good stuff.
I completely agree. Our firm has done it, and it is so enlightening. So I'm glad you guys did that too. Any other questions for our DCA director? Anyone? Okay. Thank you very much. Already heading up. Our next item is Bureau Operations Update, and we have Ms. Scott here from the Compliance. Oh, and there's Yvette from Enforcement. Good morning, gentlewomen. I don't think your mic's on, Beth.
Green. Is that better?
Yes, lean in.
I got a green light. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Beth Scott. I'm the Enforcement Chief for Compliance and Annual Report Unit. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the Compliance Unit first. We have reached out to Solid to begin a best practice work group with other boards and bureaus to put a work group together of other boards and bureaus that do inspections. So we're beginning this. It's underway. So we'll be meeting quarterly or monthly, depending on the productivity of this unit, to get ideas on streamlining our processes, things that we can do better, and also share some of the lessons learned and best practices and improvements that we've made with other boards and bureaus. We hope this collaboration will lead to maybe some joint inspections and just some better products down the road. So we're excited about that. We have filled our 2 vacant inspector positions with Jesse and Byron. They are in the audience behind me today. So we are
Byron. Okay, there's Byron.
Yeah, they're back there.
Okay.
And our 1 vacant position is our office tech, and that we are making an offer today. So we hope to have that filled. So we are very excited to have those staff on board to add to our cadre of very efficient, hardworking staff. So we'll be fully staffed, and that's going to assist us quite a bit. So the compliance unit has collaborated with the investigation unit on some of our inspections, which led to some of our emergency actions. So in your packet, you're going to see the stats for our inspections. It's attachment 5B. It will show an increase in the amount of inspections we have done from the first quarter to the second quarter, from 33 to 50. That's an increase that was able to be made by being efficient, by dedicated staff, and we hope that trend of upward is going to continue into the 3rd and 4th quarter. So we're very motivated to see that number go up. All the information on the compliance unit. Do you have any questions on that before I move on to the annual report unit?
I do, of course.
Okay. Well, let me get my pen, Margaret. Okay.
I was trying to look at this more carefully, and I have a number of questions. Enforcement referral issue, that's an internal referral to the enforcement unit, correct?
Yes, what that means is when we go out and do an inspection, if we find minor violations, it will go on the notice to comply. But if we identify possible material violations, then we will come back and refer that on to the enforcement unit to look into that further.
I have a question then about, I'd like to give an example, if you can tell me how you process this. You do an inspection, you find that there aren't any or hardly any performance fact sheets in the student files. How do you then proceed?
Well, we have a really proactive approach to school performance fact sheets and disclosures that we're putting into place, and we're constantly working to improve that through the annual report unit. So the annual report unit will do some review of those documents just throughout the year. But when it comes to an inspection, so we have our workshops, we also have our monthly conference call, and we do focus a lot on school performance fact sheets and backup documentation. But when we go to a institution, if it's an announced inspection, then we are looking on the website prior to arrival and giving the school a deficiency notice and saying these are the items that we see, so these will be what we'll be discussing when we get to your school. So if we get there, and so there's back and forth weeks before the inspection, and sometimes it does relate to that we are seeing a dramatic, the inspectors are saying there is improvement in that area based on all of our proactive work in the other areas. So we are seeing some returns on some of the proactive things we're doing outside of inspections. But when we get to the school, if that remains, that's a material violation, and that will be an enforcement referral and result in more than likely a citation. The backup documentation, I mean, it's not something they can just fix, and it needs to be happening along the way, not just fixed because we're there. So it's a very important part of our inspection and our process overall.
I was looking at the inspection reports online, and I noticed, I just looked at a few, but somewhere it said that they didn't have any fact sheets in their file, or there were some fact sheets missing, or most of them missing, or something like that, and they were listed as a minor violation. And I'm wondering if you list that as a minor violation and they then get something in the file, that's the end of that, or is there a referral to determine whether or not, in fact, they weren't giving fact sheets out to students?
Yes, ma'am, I understand that, but I'm pretty sure that the notice to complies that you're speaking of are aged notice to complies, because we realize that is statutorily a material violation, so it would not show up on an NTC currently. So we have been very proactive in the training and working with our DCA council to make sure that we're labeling that a material violation and acting accordingly. It is very important to us.
And that would be the same for where you don't find evidence of refund calculations in the file? Would that also be treated as material?
That's case by case. I would have to say that's case by case. But if we're of course the most important thing that we're looking at is student protection, and refunds are a very big part of that. Now, it's a difference between whether the school is making refunds or just not documenting it well. So it's really case by case in that area, but it is something that we take very seriously.
So then currently, if you find that there isn't documentation in the file, how do you then determine whether or not that's a clerical issue or whether they're actually not making refunds?
The inspectors on site can ask for ledgers, for proof, for that type of there's other documentation. Mm-hmm. If they will be very diligent in determining if the school is indeed. We will reach out to students. We will they'll be very diligent to make sure that it's a record keeping and educate the school moving forward. But if they cannot determine that it's simply a record keeping, then it would be an enforcement referral for a full investigation.
And on fact sheets, then I assume you do the same, that if they're not in the file, then you're reaching out to students to see what they understood before they enrolled as far as what their chances of graduation or enrollment were?
Yes, ma'am. We do that on every case that we inspect, regardless of whether we see a problem or not, because we're quantifying the information that the school is reporting. We're not just looking at the numbers. We're reaching out to students and quantifying that is indeed accurate.
I appreciate the explanation. I'm very glad for the changes. I appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
We take a lot of your suggestions, actually, and you bring a lot of good suggestions that make us think and go back and make improvements. So I appreciate you also.
Glad all my comments aren't wasted.
I said a lot of them.
I will say, having been on the other side of this, that generally if during an inspection the Bureau doesn't find calculations or fact sheets, that they then ask for a whole bunch more student files to look at to see if it is a systemic issue or just, one file. So they definitely take that piece of it very seriously.
I have just one follow-up question. So on the for example, the unpaid refunds, are the inspectors going in and spot checking, for example, comparing what amount students were quoted in the enrollment agreement versus how much money the school has received, for example, from federal student aid and other money?
Yes, at times we use an actual worksheet and do the math and the calculations ourselves to see if it's agreeing with what the student is receiving back.
And that's done proactively regardless of students making complaints? Or?
Oh yes, that's part of an inspection.
Just one other comment too, and that is, I think you bring up a good point about the date of the inspections. When you go online, you really can only look at or search inspections by the name of the school. And I just wonder, when you're thinking about for the future information technology stuff, if another search might be by date.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. And also, just on the same note, I was looking for something with the schools the other day, and I noticed that the way that documentation is labeled is not consistent. So if you have a school and it'll say something like a notice to comply or something like that, and then some of them will say close and some of them will say something else, and so it's sometimes hard to tell exactly what the status is, and I think some of them are older, but the language in each school outcome of those things is not necessarily saying the same thing. So you could say closed or open, or you know what I mean. It's just they all have different labels, and I had to open each one to kind of try to figure out what the outcome was.
Yes, ma'am. Well, closed school documents are not going to be up there. So, but I believe what you're seeing is about a year ago that we took the recommendation of the committee and schools, and so when a NTC, a notice to comply, is cleared, now we are putting notice to comply cleared.
Okay.
But that wasn't retroactively. It only began from date forward. So
Okay.
You might see that entry on some of them. Schools were wanting that clear, that they have complied with that notice to comply, as opposed to it's just hanging out there. So we implemented that about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And so those entries will have that, but we did not go back. So as the rotation happens with inspections, that will be replaced with the new information.
Okay.
The loading right now of is pretty manual, but we will be looking at that for sure in our upgrade system.
Thank you.
Real quick, I wanted to commend you on the notable increase in inspections, most notably the unannounced inspections. That's a very positive trend, and encourage you to continue that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That reminded me of one more question, and that is, I think I asked you last time when you think you will get caught up on doing the statutorily required number of inspections, and I think you gave me a time period, but could you just refresh our recollection on that?
Well, we are working on that. So we have set goals for inspectors, and with our staffing, once we increase to 3 inspections per inspector a month, we will hit our statutory requirements. So time-wise, we are always doing things and coming up with ideas to increase that. So I would say, it's hard to give a date, because some of our ideas may be extremely popular and we just hit it in about 6 months, but it could be, over a period of time. But what we're doing is trying to be really proactive in everything we do outside of inspections that increases public protection. also increasing our full inspections. So as long as we're trending, it's just hard for me to give an end date of when that will occur, but it is occurring as we speak.
When you said maybe in 6 months, does that mean that you'll be then doing per month the number of inspections needed to be current, or that you'll actually be catching up?
Well, it's going to take time to actually catch up for
Okay.
the 1,140 schools, but we're coming up with some ideas that I'll be bringing forward the next meeting that will help increase that and get us closer to that point. That's our end goal.
Right. And at the current rate, do you have any idea how soon you would be able to get caught up?
I don't know mathematically what that time would equal out. 36 times how many months into 1,140?
So your average would not need to be 36.
That's what our average would need
inspections
to
a
be
month.
to get to the end of it. But off the top of my head, how many months that would take to get to that,
You can do the math.
Yeah.
I can't. Not off the.
Thank you.
Can I could phone a friend maybe? Yeah. But we're trending in that direction, so.
Just really quick, a point of clarification regarding refunds and who looks at refunds as well. You also have the Department of Education that will come and look at refunds, program reviews. At least this is for federal financial aid. The accrediting bodies will come and do reviews of refunds when they come and do their site visits. And then every year you have your certified accountants doing audits, also reviewing refunds. And that's usually the best place to look to see if there's a problem, is to go and just say, all right, the auditors are here. They looked at 50 files. Oh, they found 1 out of 50. It's not systemic. They expanded it. Whatever it might be, that's the trigger for you, right?
Yes, sir. We do coordinate with that information, for sure.
Got a lot of people looking at refunds, at least on the federal side. The non-federal, I think it's basically the state.
Can you remind me what the statutory requirement for visits is?
What, I'm sorry, ma'am?
Visits, the unannounced inspections?
That schools have a minimum of 2 inspections in a 5-year period, an announced and an unannounced.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ms. Scott? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
I'm moving on to the...
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you had a second topic.
That's because I would like to just move on. I'm going to move on to the annual report unit. So we have assigned one of our analysts as a new school analyst. So what we're doing here is this analyst reaches out to all new schools to provide very proactive, direct assistance with the annual report submission process. So schools that are new into the system, they get some hands-on of these requirements. So we're hoping that this proactive approach will equate to less notices to comply and less issues and greater public protection because the schools have this resource soon after getting approved. This Tuesday, we did the first conference call with just the new schools. So we just gave the new schools the opportunity to have our attention at a conference call to ask any questions, get direction, and that was very effective. The schools really liked it, and the schools are asking a lot of good questions. So we're happy to have that process. So that's one of the proactive things I was talking about that we've done in that unit thus far. I do have some really exciting news regarding the annual report submission process. So first I want to thank our Office of Information Services, Jason Piccioni and his team. They've been really assisting us greatly with their expertise and help to help us improve our annual report submission process. So we have delayed the portal opening until October to hopefully have this new system in place by that time. This new system will allow the schools to, it'll make it more effective for the schools as far and staff, so to submit these reports. Some of the improvements will be that the schools will be able to pause on their entries. They will be able to come back, get to a section and come back maybe the next day instead of they don't have that ability now, so sometimes they don't know where they're at, so they resubmit, which causes duplicates, and it causes a lot of information, and it's difficult for a big school to be able to get through that entire process without stopping. So that's one good advantage. The other good advantage to this will be that we have the ability to speak to the schools through the system. So if they submit their annual report and it's deficient, like they're approved for a certain number of programs, but school performance fact sheets for that number of programs were not attached, the system will automatically give them a deficiency notice or won't let them proceed if they've entered the programs right. So it will cut out all the mailing. They will also be able to upload all of their documents into this system, so there won't be the mail. And another good thing that will be happening with this is now the way that the system works is we have to wait until the portal closes, and a few months after the portal closes, we start having the ability to go through all of this information, and then at the end of several months, we're able to put that information out on the web. This system will allow us to look at the documents as soon as the school submits, review that, make sure it's right, and put it up on the web immediately. So there won't be that delay or the confusion that why isn't all of 2015 up there until 6 months after it's done. So we're really excited about that. Do you have any questions on this? It is a work in progress, but we're hoping that this will be able to roll out, and we will be the portal postponement. We'll be extending the date so the schools will have the correct amount of time to get their reports in. They won't be cheated out of any time, and we will have some very good tutorials and things on how to use this system. It's pretty user friendly, but we will be doing a lot of work on making sure the schools understand this process. But it is going to free up a lot of staff time also for more of these proactive activities I've been telling you about.
So real quick, I just want to give kudos to DCA OIS in supporting. One of the things that I noticed when I first came to the Bureau is that Bureau has a ton of spreadsheets. So you all know that. And Jason Piccioni and his team have been definitely helpful in some of the major things that we're really trying to push, at least until we get this entire new system. And so in some ways, yes, these are Band-Aids, but they're Band-Aids that can be transferable once we get our new system. So this is one of the big things that I just want to say thanks to DCA and thanks to Beth and her team for coming up with some of these ideas.
A quick question. When you have conference calls for schools on this or other things, are those announced in a way that we could get notice of those so we could listen in if we wanted to?
They are announced. We put that on our website, and we do email blasts. Currently, right now, there's a limited number of spaces available for conference calls, so we only have availability of 20 lines. So right now we have probably 80 to 100 schools that want to participate, so we're booked. So we do a lot of outreach in this area, and we try to add calls as the system is available for this. And we are hoping in the future to go to a webinar-based type of call. But it's been very popular, and so there's that.
I was going to actually suggest that, especially with the new system, if there's an opportunity to do something like that, where you could actually put the system up on a screen so people can participate and see what's happening through WebEx or Zoom or whatever works. I think that would be really helpful, because the videos that you guys do that schools can watch about how to do your packets and all that stuff is super helpful. But I think something brand new like this, it would be better if you could have something more interactive where people could submit questions.
So the last thing that we were going to talk about is the student surveys. The student survey was in your packet. Mr. Robert Bells is going to come up and speak to this, since this process began before I arrived at the Bureau, if that's all right. So that's all the information I have. Are there any questions before I turn this section over to Mr. Bells?
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Beth. Morning, Mr. Bales.
Morning. All right, so student survey, a little bit of history. We actually, can't remember how it came about. I think internally in the Bureau, we were looking at our survey and annual process of results from the survey, and we decided something different. survey, basically a little bit of history. This survey is given out as part of the compliance inspection. So when the compliance inspectors go out to the school, typically part of their inspection is talking with the students, obviously, about experience, and administering the survey, and then bringing the results back, and then analyzing the results, and then determining what we can do with those results. So if you look at still under that same attachment,
You have a page number?
5B. So if you look at the first page, that is the current student survey. And again, one of the things we wanted to do is get a committee together from the folks at the Bureau and look at the questions we're asking and determine, are these questions giving us the results that we need to changes? And so as a result of the committee meeting, the internal committee meeting, we made some changes. So the next 2 pages will show the revised survey. And then what happened was we had planned to introduce this as a topic, as an agenda item at one of our committee meetings, I want to say about 2 years ago. And I think we either ran out of time before we could discuss it, or I think one of the committee members left and we no longer had a quorum. So we never discussed it, but we did provide it as an exhibit, and we're still hoping to get some feedback from it. So I guess what we're looking at now is if the committee wants to, again, take a look, not necessarily have a discussion about it, but take a look at the new survey and give us some feedback, maybe via Richie, emailing Richie, if you have any suggestions for additional questions, or just questions about why we're asking certain questions, we can certainly, answer. But, this is a project that's been in the works for quite some time, so we really want to get it nailed down and start using it. The other thing is we developed this survey, or revised this survey, to be compatible with our Scantron machines, so that we don't have to do a manual analysis on those spreadsheets that Dr. Marion talked about. Rather, we can produce immediate results and cumulative results for all of the surveys that we have.
What do you do with the comments in relation to the scan? Obviously, you can't Scantron that. So if somebody has a narrative, what do you do with it?
Yeah, actually, Scantron does have a way of capturing some comments, and so we do use those comments as well.
Okay, great.
Comments are often tell a bigger story than just
exactly.
Yes,
that's why I asked. Robert, do you have anything else?
Okay.
Do you have anything else?
Not for this section.
Okay. Any questions on this section?
Yeah, quick comment. I think this is much improved, so I think it's really nice. Like, the question is, did you receive a school performance fact sheet? You and I know what a school performance fact sheet is. A student is going to remember, yes or no, did I know how many people were graduated versus placed? So we might want to just, in parentheses, say, graduation rates, placement rates, something like that, so that might trigger their memory. Yes, I saw or didn't see that. And sometimes it's a yes or a no versus a yes, no, or I don't remember. I don't know if it matters that much for I don't recall, because they do get an awful lot in their enrollment packets.
So I think if there are more comments on the survey, because it wasn't on the agenda specifically, I think that we should put it on as a future agenda item.
Or I would just say send your updates to Richie.
I do have a question, and that is this survey also sent out to somewhat recent former graduates or former students, whether they graduated or not, or is it just given to current students?
This survey is just given to current students.
Okay. On to did you have a second item, Robert? Or are you going to come back? Okay. So move on to Ms. Johnson.
So is this going to be added as an agenda item for a later meeting? Is this going to be added as an agenda item for a later meeting?
Would you like it to be?
Well, I would like to provide comments. I can send them to Richie, but it would be nice to have an update on the progress of the survey.
Yeah, we can add it to the November agenda. All right.
Good morning, Yvette Johnson, Enforcement Chief.
Yvette, can you leave? That microphone is not very loud. Turn them both on and lean in. I think when Dean was up there, if you just leaned in, it was better. So
okay. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to sit here this morning and present to you my information. The first thing I would like to speak about is to give you some updates as far as what the Bureau, the complaint investigations and discipline units have been doing. I've come up here many times and spoken about our staffing issues. I'm happy to report that we currently have 3 vacancies, and we are in the process of interviewing today for those vacancies right now. It's for the Associate Governmental Program Analyst, which is what we call our field investigator.
Once again, real quick, that's huge, because when I came to the Bureau, we had 22 vacancies, and over half of those vacancies were in our enforcement area. So the fact that we only have 3 left at this point, I think is a huge kudos to Yvette and her team, and I think you will start to see some more good work that we're doing in that unit.
And based on that, I'd like to also thank the staff that has been here through all of this. They have, really struggled and really come to terms with dealing with this and, kicking in and filling in where the holes were. So I'd like to thank them for all the work that they've done. Also, as part of that, they've also been very instrumental in mentoring the new staff that we've brought on board. We've established a buddy system where they are actually, the new staff that comes on board is actually assigned to one of our more seasoned analysts, and they work together very carefully to, learn the processes and to work their complaints and to learn about investigations. So thank you to all of the staff of the Complaint Investigations and Discipline Unit. During this time, we've also increased our collaboration with the boards and bureaus within DCA. We're working very closely with the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. Over the past couple of months, we've issued 3 emergency decisions against 3 barbering cosmetology schools that were found to be offering programs and charging students for these programs. However, the students were not receiving the education that they were paying for. Based off of the investigation and in collaboration with the compliance unit, we were able to confirm these violations, and we issued 3 emergency decisions, which we are able to do, and those are on when we have found evidence to show that the schools are not in compliance and that there's imminent harm to students and that there's fraud involved with that. Currently, those cases are currently over at the Attorney General's office, and we are waiting hearing dates on those. So I'd like to thank both the Division of Investigations as well as the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology for their help with those cases.
And just one more piece to that is that we have also started to have monthly meetings with D of I and BBC, so we can continue to crack down on some of these situations and bad actors.
And
were they accredited institutions, as a curiosity?
The 3 that we did, no, they are not. We also have staff that are working very closely with other organizations such as the Department of Insurance, Department of Industrial Relations, and these are regarding cases where we found that students are getting workers' compensation and vouchers to achieve their education. However, the schools are not providing the education that these students are paying for, so we're working very closely with them as well, and the District Attorney's offices in the various counties. I'd like to provide an update on training that we're receiving. Next week, actually, the Office of the Attorney General will be coming out, and they'll be providing training to our staff, both our licensing as well as our enforcement staff. And they'll be providing training on investigative techniques, courtroom testifying, evidence collection, and report writing. So this this will be very good in bringing our new staff on board, as well as our older staff that may not have gone through the complete experience of, you do an investigation and it goes over to the Attorney General's office, but you never see the final result because either the school has withdrawn or closed. So this gets them to see from what happens throughout the process of an investigation. We're excited about that. At the last meeting...
Sorry, Yvette, I do have a quick question just about the training. Do you know, is it Deputy Attorneys General who would be providing that training to the staff? Are they from the licensing section, or do you know if they're from the Consumer Law Division in the Attorney General's
They're from the
office?
licensing section. We actually have a liaison with the Attorney General's office, and our liaison, in conjunction with one of his counterparts, will be offering the training.
Any of your staff ever work and coordinate throughout the process of an investigation or anything with the DAG or with your liaison, or do you feel like it's more of just a handoff? You've gotten to the point where the case has been referred and it goes and you're done. Do you ever interact with them early on in the investigation level, even prior to it maybe being referred to DFI or internally at the department?
With the Attorney General's office? No, it's more of, right now it's more of the point where we have found the violations and we are referring it over for the development of the pleading, and then the Attorney General's office will work with us from that point forward, saying, if there's more information that's needed or anything after that. At the last meeting, Ms. Satsui and had a question about the outreach to students that had filed complaints. So we implemented a process where we are sending letters out to those students. For right now, any student that has not had contact with us in 2018, we have sent a letter to them, letting them know that, hey, we're still here. We have your complaint. If you have more information that you'd like to provide us, please do so. And we'll continue to work with them. But we just wanted to, and thank you for that recommendation and that comment. And, and it gives us the opportunity to focus more on our consumer protection as well as our customer service with our students. So thank you for that, so that they are aware that we still care, that we are here and we care.
Have you gotten any responses from those letters yet?
And we're waiting. It's September 14th is the date that we're expecting the responses to come through. We have also established, and I believe it was Mr. Holt that suggested this before, regarding specialized teams. We've been working with our staff and we've been establishing specialized teams. And this morning we had a lot of questions about refunds and discussion about refunds. We actually have a team that was established specifically for student refunds. So if we receive a complaint from a student regarding not receiving a refund, we have a specialized group that those complaints are handed off to so that they can handle them more quickly so that they don't get in with the rest of the queue, because we know how important the money is and everything to those students. So we want to make sure that if they were to do a refund, they are given that refund in a timely manner so that they can pursue their education if that is what they're choosing to do.
Thank you for following up on that, and given the complexity of that topic area and others, I think that's a good direction.
Those are all the updates I have. I provided you with the copy of our statistics for the last quarter for everything that's happened in 2018, as well as some comparisons of 2017. I'd also like to go over some of our student impact, which is the first item on the statistics that you were given. Speaking of the refunds, the staff were able to obtain $36,202 in refunds to students. So that's a great thank you to the staff for that. We've also worked with students that have not been able to get their certificates of completion, proof of training documents, or transcripts from schools. And much appreciation from students on their behalf where they've reached out to the schools and they've just not been able to obtain those themselves. We've helped students be able to get reinstated at schools, and we've also helped with students that were promised job placement services that were not being provided. We've ensured that the schools are providing those services.
A follow-up question. So for student records, for schools that have closed in the past, what is the process for ensuring that that the students have access to their records going forward? So I know that the BPP sometimes takes over as custodian of records. I'm asking because I have, for example, a student who had previously filed a complaint with the BPP. Following this complaint, the school shut down, and now the custodian of records is listed. The listed custodian of records is simply just the email of the previous owner, and the student is trying to get his records.
And I'll have someone else speak to this, but from my knowledge, when the school closes, we go through the closed school process. They file an application for closed schools, and in that application, they tell us who the custodian of record is, and they are required in regulation to tell us who that is, so that the records are maintained permanently in California, and there is a contact for those students to get those records.
Okay, so my issue is, for example, when a school closes for because of misconduct, is it appropriate, and is there for the custodian of records to be listed to be the owner that engaged in the misconduct? And is there a way for the BPP to check for this and ensure that that doesn't happen, that there's a proper custodian of records who can provide the information to students after the school close?
Under the Bureau's statute, there is a provision where prior to closing, they are supposed to provide copies of transcripts to the Bureau. That doesn't happen often. There's also regulations that they're required to keep the records in California and provide a custodian of records that would be responsible. So it's a matter of, once a school closes, they don't follow the law, and sometimes they're, as we saw in Corinthians, they go through bankruptcy proceedings. So we could definitely put it on a future agenda item if you want more discussion about it, but it would require legislative changes to change that framework.
I don't know that, well, I mean, if schools are required to do this and the BPP is in charge of overseeing that schools comply with the statute and regulations, I don't necessarily know that you need new statutes or new regulations. It's just a matter of the BPP somehow following up to ensure that the schools comply with those statutes and regulations. So my suggestion is simply, if there's something, if the BPP can figure out a way to ensure that schools comply with that, that would be helpful to students who are later trying to get their records from closed schools.
Agree. We've been having conversations about that, so absolutely, that's noted for sure.
Been provided with the statistical information. Are there any questions that you have regarding the information provided?
I have a couple of questions, of course. I noticed on the complaints closed on page 3 of 7 of the attachments, there was a big uptick in the complaints being closed in May and June, and I wondered what you attribute that to.
That has been a very focused effort. I believe I've spoken about this in the past, but part of our backlog, not only with the number of complaints that we have, is our managerial staffing and the ability, based off of their other workload, to be able to. We actually implemented, I believe it was at the end of April, we implemented overtime for the managers per se, and we really coming in on Saturdays, taking things home, staying late in the evening, doing those complaints. We also had help from our Deputy Bureau Chief, Lisa Raffretti, and our Compliance Chief, in reviewing those the cases as well. So that really, really helped us.
Is that something you're going to be able to continue to do for some time till you get more caught up?
That is what we're working on, yes. And we're still doing it to this date.
Margaret, if you have a pot of money somewhere that you can loan me, that would be amazing.
Anytime you want me to testify about how the Bureau needs more money and more positions, I am delighted to do it, especially in the compliance enforcement area as compared to the processing of school applications where things seem to be much more caught up. So, you know, there's a statutory requirement, for example, on inspections per year. And, you know, we're years away from complying with that. So, you know, there's just reason to get more staff, to get more money. So, you know, you tell me, I'll be there.
I appreciate that.
Oh, are you still going?
Yeah, I had another question. My other question was on page 4 of 7 on the complaints received. Well, a couple of questions. Internally generated, I assume that includes what was listed on the inspection report as referred to for enforcement or something like that, right?
That is correct.
Does it include anything besides that?
Yes, we also get referrals from licensing. We receive from admin. It could be someone that's called, and it also includes tips. We may receive just a phone call that says, hey, look at this, and, you know, not really getting the information, and we consider that more of an internal as well because they may wish to remain anonymous.
Right. And I assume that also includes if somebody files a complaint about some topic, but you recognize, the person recognizes, looking at that complaint, that there's a broader issue here, then that takes on a life as an internal.
Not necessarily. It depends because a lot of times when we're going through an investigation, we may determine that it is something larger than just the issue that you're complaining about. So let's go back to refunds. You know, student complains, hey, I didn't get my refund in time. But we start going into that complaint and we discover that there's a bigger issue with the school regarding their finances. So it just takes on a larger life.
But that would still be coded as an external
That's
complaint.
still coded as an external, correct.
Okay. And then I noticed that the number of complaints received this year is significantly lower than last year, and I wondered what you attribute that to.
We're only halfway through the year.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Got it. And then again, as the complaints keep coming in, and no matter how much you're working, you're still got a lot behind. And I guess, you know, that comes into, well, I guess that's, never mind, that's a question to put on the agenda for future as to, you know, what can be done about that. And I am very glad to hear that you're starting to work more closely with the other boards and bureaus. I have found that to be very fruitful of cosmetology, LVNs, etc. So, great.
David, did you have a question?
Yeah, just an idea. You've got urgent, high, and routine. A typical urgent complaint would be a refund, is my understanding?
Not necessarily it may not rise, as we're doing our prioritization, it may not rise to the category of an urgent complaint. But we still take those very
What types
seriously.
of things are urgent versus high versus routine? Just to give us a feel.
Okay, so for urgent, we have allegations that indicate immediate danger to the public health, safety, or welfare, imminent or ongoing criminal activity, unlicensed activity posing an immediate danger to the public health, safety, or welfare, and abetting an unlicensed activity, multiple or singular complaints of fraud that potentially involve a substantial number of people or a substantial amount of money, and arrest or convictions.
And high would be a...
And high is significant financial harm to a person. When we're concerned that evidence may be... And we have when a complainant or victim may not be available at and once again, unlicensed activity. There's multiple complaints, and when we have schools that we place on probation, if we receive
those are mainly in the urgent, primarily unaccredited institutions.
I can't say that. It's a combination.
Thank you.
So there are lots of complaints that are in the bucket for over, for 2-3 years. And I noticed that also of the top 5 allegations, by far the most common is fraud. There's a 3-year, I believe there's a 3-year statute of limitations for fraud. And I'm wondering if there's any, if the Bureau provides any information up front that, students have the option of filing their own civil litigation, and they have a 3-year statute of limitations, which could run before the BPP finishes investigation.
Unfortunately, the way the fraud is listed here, it's kind of a catch-all for us because of our IT system, and it doesn't give us a real bucket of choices. So fraud may be anything from, as we call it, selling of hours, and that's the majority of what's in there are selling of hours or other misconduct. But we do provide information to the students that lets them know that just because they filed a complaint with us, it does not prohibit them from seeking other remedies.
And just to clarify for everyone else, the statute of limitations is a civil action. So the Bureau itself doesn't have a statute of limitations on going after the allegation in the school.
Yeah, it's just, I have a case where someone submitted a fraud claim, a claim that alleged fraud, and the PPP informed her that there wasn't enough evidence. They didn't have enough evidence, and so she's having to file her own civil case. So she's doing it within her statute of limitation, within the statute of limitations period. But it's just helpful for other students who are thinking about this, who are maybe waiting for a decision and haven't received a decision in a while from the BPP. It's really important information as part of knowing what students' rights are.
In the complaint process, do you work with the accrediting bodies? Because they typically have a lot of clout and can make things happen quickly.
Yes, whenever we have a school that is accredited and it's an issue that crosses both our lines, and yes, we do. Department of Education as well, or whoever the other entity is that may have some jurisdiction within.
Can you, in the top 5 closure reasons, can you explain to me what non-jurisdictional exempt means?
It means that for non-jurisdictional, it means that it doesn't fall within under our purview, that we have no authority as far as what the allegation may be. Exempt means that the school, once again, is not under our jurisdiction, so it's not one of our.
Okay, and
so,
so you have 2 non-jurisdictionals. You have one that's a referral and the other one that's non-exempt. How do you differentiate those?
Non-jurisdictional could be an issue that comes about, I don't like my teacher, something like that. Or let's see, some of the other items are, gosh, there's so many different things that could come up that just don't fall under the purview of what the laws and regulations for the Bureau of Private Postsecondary are. Or say like one of the ones that we received may have been the student had drugs on campus. We wouldn't handle that one. We would refer that to the local department. So an exempt one would be where it's a school that does not require our approval because they meet one of the that are listed in our statute.
How many, it's an interesting question. How do you think people find the Bureau to complain to if their institution is not Bureau approved? Do they just, like, when you have those conversations, do they just call you and say, I think you're the right people to call?
Some of them will call the Department of Education, and the Department of Education will refer them to us.
Okay.
I had a friend that went to a school, and she had a problem, and she told me to call you.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. I know that's a question that has really no point, but I'm just wondering, since we're so active in making sure that Bureau-approved schools are telling students who to call if there's a problem, how are they finding you if no one's telling them? But I guess it's good that they're figuring it out.
And some students have gone to other schools that were Bureau approved.
Yeah, that's true.
And they luckily they know about us. Yeah. So the word about us is out there.
Anecdotally, can you recall if those are generally public schools, or what sorts of schools are they that they're complaining to you about?
They're public schools, and we also get, or not, we get high schools.
Mm-hmm.
We get,
Mm-hmm.
because, post-secondary,
Mm-hmm.
we get complaints against schools that just may not require our approval at all because maybe they don't charge over $2,500. They're not receiving any type of funding, and
Or they could be a religious school, or I mean, there's
Right.
all those different exemptions,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So I have another question related to timing. So for first, so considering the timeline that it takes for the BPP to do its investigation and then handing it off sometimes to the AG to do the follow-up, it could take considerably long time between when students start making complaints and when a school potentially closes. And typically, STRIF provides refunds for schools that close within 120 days. But there's a provision under the code that allows the BPP to make a determination that the quality or value of the school deteriorated before that 120 days. To my knowledge, I don't know of cases where the BPP has used that authority, although I think it's something that I'd like the BPP to consider doing more because these investigations take such a long time. And I have a case where someone made a complaint and it was outside the window of the 120 days before the BPP eventually closed the school. And so they were out of the closed school discharge refund. And if the BPP had made a finding that the quality or value of the school had deteriorated before that 120 days, he potentially would have been in the window to be eligible for STRIF refund. So it's just something that I'd like the BPP to consider in terms of like the timelines for how long it's taking to sort of follow up on these investigations leading to a final outcome with the school.
But still encourage that student to file the STRIF claim.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
Any further questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay. Thank you. I think next up will be Marina. A licensing update. Morning.
Morning. So in your packets, I've included the licensing monthly statistics, but also, if you remember from the last meeting, we provided some new charts to show a 12-month trend of licensing application stats. So we've also included those charts again in the packet, but instead of showing you the last 12 months like we did in the last meeting, these charts are by fiscal year because we just started a new fiscal year. So that's how we displayed those charts. But I'll just first go over the kind of the monthly overview. I say monthly because it's as of August 1st and we start over with the new fiscal year. So it's really just reflecting mainly what came in July and where we stood as of August 1st. So just going to point out that we are still maintaining no backlog. So all applications that are pending with us right now, or pending review, I should say, are either incomplete or actually, yeah, all of them actually are incomplete. So if you look at the first row that says new full approval, those applications, those 19, at this point, as of today, they're either still incomplete or they've since then become complete and been assigned to an analyst. So there are no full applications waiting to be reviewed by an analyst. And I'll also point out for the renewal full applications, There's only one pending assignment, and that one is also incomplete. So again, even with the renewals, there are no applications pending assignment. They're all being worked by either licensing or QEU at this point. So that's been great. We've been able to maintain that balance. And then I also want to point out, just in the box below, kind of in the middle, it has total pending applications on, and then it shows as of 9/1/17, 4/1/18, and 8/1/18. Just looking at those numbers, you'll see there's been a very steady decline in total pending applications over the last year. A very significant decline. So that's what we like to see. That's what we're looking for, and we anticipate seeing that continue to decline, and those total pending apps continue to come down. And also, speaking to pending apps, the very bottom box that shows as of August 1st, 2018, it shows what the oldest applications are that are being reviewed or in the queue waiting review. If you compare it to the last meeting stats, a lot of these dates are not as old anymore. So even those old ones that have been pending being reviewed for a while, we're working through those. So you'll continue to see those dates move up. But I just want to point out that the two very bottom rows in that box, median date of full apps in queue and median date of renewal full apps in queue, that's really your best indicator of kind of where we are on the applications we're currently reviewing. So they're not that old. Most of them are within the last 2 to 3 months that we're reviewing. We're getting the reviews done pretty quickly, getting, if there's deficiencies, getting the deficiency letters out to the schools within a very reasonable time frame. So and that's thanks to our staff and our management who have really been, working hard and working with schools as much as possible to get those things through. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, we're still doing the licensing workshops, and all of that has been a huge help. And even the conference calls we have with schools, I mean, even, those help, because we're not just working, as you can see here, there's quite a range of applications we work, right? We're not just working initial applications all the time. We get change applications coming in constantly. So the more the schools know about what changes they need to notify us of and how they're supposed to notify us, the quicker we can process those change applications, so we can, focus on the deficient, new applications we get as well. So I don't, those were the main things I wanted to point out on this first page, this chart of all the stats of as August 1. So if anyone has any questions on this one.
I would just like to say thank you, because I've had a couple of calls from people who help people work on applications, just jubilant at the fact that they had an application that was reviewed and moved through in much faster than it has been. So thank you guys for really pushing on that. I really appreciate it.
So the rest of the charts, as I pointed out, they're by fiscal year. And these really give you an idea in a couple different forms. There's a line graph and a bar chart. And again, we're doing it by fiscal year. So each color is a different fiscal year. And it really, if you follow it by the dates, you'll really see the trend of the pending apps coming down. Completed apps fluctuates, but for the most part, increase over time. And again, those are the trends, that we want to see. So I wasn't going to go over each chart in detail. So if anyone had any questions on any of the charts here, or any of the numbers, I'd be happy to answer those questions. All right, thank you.
You want a question, don't you? You kind of want one.
But I made these pretty charts. Someone
I'm
asked questions about them.
I'm hoping it's a good thing. So.
It looks like we're down about 40% in applications with the non-accred apps from 16 to 18, and I would guess it'll be down again this year. Is just my industry perspective.
Yeah, just looking over, if you look over just the trend over the last 3 years, it peaks and valleys. It fluctuates so much, it's hard to say there's really any trend, but you're right. Recently, there's been a downward trend in apps received, and we think that's mainly because when ACICS, lost their DOE recognition, we got a lot of full applications because those accredited schools were then seeking full approval. So we think that's partly because we're not getting those applications
Hit a
anymore.
little surge there.
Right, a little surge, right. And so I think that surge is over, and now it's kind of starting to balance back into the normal trend. So,
how are you on staffing right now?
Thanks for asking, because I did want to mention that we just have one vacant SSA, and that position should be going up. The job posting should be going up really soon. One vacancy right now.
Does anyone else have any questions for Ms. O'Connor? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
So I think Robert was going to come back up to do an update on quality of education. Welcome back.
Again. Want me to talk about the IT project or do that later?
I know it's not on the agenda, but just maybe just a quick overview, just to answer a few questions, or give a quick update, I should say.
Agendized, but to the extent you want to talk about it as part of your quality education unit and what they're doing, it would be under that. But
it was also something that the director couldn't talk about himself, so it's being delegated. And so that was on the agenda.
And I just want to offer, I know there's some new members on the committee. I'm happy to do another training on the Open Meeting Act, so there's a better understanding of why I cut you off sometimes, and I'm just trying to protect the members individually and as a group, and to give the public sufficient notice in case they do want to come and have a thorough discussion about that topic. It needs to be on the agenda. So I'm happy to do that in a future meeting.
So within the context of quality of education, can you give an update on the IT?
Well, my team of educational specialists were involved, highly involved in the business process mapping that we did, which is part of the stage 2 business analysis or alternative analysis stage. So if you remember, the California Department of Technology has a 4-stage process for all IT projects, and every state entity has to use that process. Stage 1 is basically the initial why you need an IT system, what is your business process, how do you do what you do, statutes, regulations, all that kind of thing. And if you get past stage 1, it's basically California Department of Technology telling you that it's okay to proceed with your project. And so happy to say that in May we were approved by California Department of Technology, CDT, to progress to stage 2, and that's where we're at now. So we talked a little bit about process mapping. We mapped 72 of our as-is processes. So we looked at what we do, how we do it, in relation to how an IT support system would support that. And we worked with Solid, and Solid created 72 of those as-is process maps, which is part of stage 2. And then we turned around and went and took those same processes and came up with could-be maps based on how we could do things more efficiently if we had an IT system to support those processes. So both of those, the as-is maps, the to-be maps, they're both complete at this point. And so now we're looking at developing a business requirements document that we will submit as part of stage 2, but we're still looking at some alternatives. We have some some vendors out there with some systems, and we've had them come in, do some demonstrations. So I feel like, for me, I'm very excited about it because we've never been this far in Bureau's history, and so it's really exciting. I'm the Bureau's point of contact, the project manager for the IT system, and so happy to do it. Hopefully next meeting we'll have some more update. We can certainly add it to the agenda and give you some more information. We should be a little bit further along.
Thank you. Yeah, let's Richie can just make sure that that's on the agenda for November. Thanks.
So last meeting, I provided an update on where we were with the Senate Bill 1247 schools. If you guys recall, those are the schools that are not accredited but offering degree programs, and we kind of put those in 2 different buckets. So we have the initial group that were approved, that were already approved when the legislation came into play in January of 2015. They already had degree programs at that point in time. And right now we're tracking 49 of those schools that are required to achieve full accreditation by July 1st of 2020. And then there was the second bucket of schools that are provisionally approved. So they are limited to offering 2 degree programs, and they have 5 years to become accredited. And that 5 years starts on the day that they are given provisional approval. So what I've done, I know last meeting I was asked a couple of questions about how many accrediting agencies there are out there, and then I was asked about which schools pick which accrediting agencies. So if you look at I have 2 charts. One is attachment 5D. So this is that first group of students.
Page number on there?
Sorry, I don't have page numbers on my document.
It's 55.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So this chart basically shows the breakdown of accreditors by institution. Again, we're looking at those 49 initial schools that are pursuing accreditation. And if you look across, there's pretty consistent between accreditors until you get to the last 4. So ACCSC is a popular accreditor. They accredit up to a bachelor's degree program, and they focus mostly on career education programs. DEAC is the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, and obviously, as the term implies, they accredit schools and programs that offer distance education. TRACS, and I apologize that TRACS is not identified on that list, but they're the Transnational Association of Christian Colleges and Schools, and again, as the name implies, they accredit mostly religious programs and religious schools. And then finally, WASC at the end. WASC is a regional accreditor, and they accredit a wide range of programs, starting at the bachelor's degree all the way up to a PhD and a doctorate degree. And so they're pretty popular amongst. So the second chart is that second group of students. These are or schools rather. These are the schools that were given provisional accreditation, provisional approval. And there are, I believe there are 30 of these schools right now. So if you notice, there's kind of similarity between the first chart and the second. A lot of schools chose WASC, some schools chose TRACS, and then a lot of schools are planning to offer distance education, and then the rest are kind of spread out. So a school chooses an accreditor based on a match between the programs that the school wants to offer and what the accreditor will approve or accredit. Anybody have any questions?
Anyone? Bueller? No. Do you have anything else, Mr. Bales?
I do not. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. Morning, Mr. Valverde. Here to give us an update on OSAR.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Glad to be here and happy to give you an update on the progress of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, or OSAR. And I also just wanted to give before I get started, a here to a previous comment by Beth about the value of the feedback from this group. And in OSAR as well, we've taken your feedback to heart and have made several internal changes based on that feedback. And so we appreciate the dynamic and the role and the feedback that you've provided up to this point as we continue to get our feet underneath us. So thank you for that. So this morning I'm going to give you a general update on the activities of OSAR. So beginning part of my presentation, I won't be speaking to any particular handout, just so we're all on the same page and following along. I'll just give you a couple of updates on some key areas. and then we'll transition to the handouts and go through each one of those. Part of those reflect our responsiveness to feedback from this group in the previous meeting as well. So the 3 areas I wanted to give an update on, the first one is partnership development and management. We're continuing to develop new partnerships and expand on the existing partnerships with outside agencies and stakeholders, both the statutorily identified partners and then other new partners outside of that statute that are in support of OSAR's overall mission. So since the last time I was in front of you, either myself or my staff have had meetings with the following agencies to develop those partnerships: California Workforce Association, the Sacramento Employment and Training Agency, or SETA, the California Massage Therapy Council, Goodwill Industries, the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, Breakthrough Sacramento, the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, San Diego Community College District, where as I speak my staff is there participating in a resource fair, and the California Student Aid Commission. And that's all in the last quarter, in addition to routine touch-base meetings with our statutory partners like Department of Education. So the efforts have really been centered around expanding OSAR's knowledge base, my staff's knowledge base, my knowledge base, and access to resources that we can share to students and prospective students, and basically to explore new student outreach partnerships and opportunities, which have proven to be fruitful to date. So that's partnership development. We're also working on increasing the awareness of OSAR. We're still just a little over a year in our existence, and really less than that in practice in terms of our staffing, the way our staffing played out. So we've really only been out there for a year, and we're still working hard on increasing awareness. Sort of an anecdotal sort of comment on that is, yesterday I happened to be at the Lemoore Naval Air Station in Lemoore giving a presentation to exiting servicemen and women who are looking at using their GI benefits to potentially attend private post-secondary institutions. And I had a conversation with a student about a particular school and program. And then about an hour later, as I was walking out to the car, he ran out and chased me and caught me and said, "Your presentation was so powerful, I called my younger brother who was looking at going into college as his next step, and can he call you and talk to you directly?" And so there's the way that a lot of times this just happens through word of mouth and connections. And so their OSAR continues to grow in that way as well. We've also been doing it a little bit more actively and strategically through adding to our web resources, pushing more information out through social media. We're seeing more and more, of course, that's the preferred method for a lot of our students and prospective students in terms of a communication infrastructure. It's what they are drawn to. It's what they're responsive to. So we're putting more and more information out about our activities and our partners' activities through our various social media accounts. We've worked closely with the department's Office of Public Affairs on media opportunities, such as interviews that I've done for radio and print media, and a recent television spot that I did on the local news as well that helped increase awareness of OSAR services. Another example would be we've had OSAR flyers placed in all of the America Job Center locations in the Sacramento workforce area, administered by SETA and all of their youth providers as well. It's a model that we're looking to replicate in all the local workforce areas throughout the state through my work in connection with the California Workforce Association. So we're really excited about that as we work more with prospective student population that are coming out of retraining programs. Fall conference season is coming, so I'll be attending several fall conferences that will also help increase the awareness of OSAR. Lastly is the closed school side. We're continuing our efforts to prepare for impending school closures, possible school closures, schools that are at threat of closing, in meeting with the various bureau chiefs, with enforcement, in our schools of concern meetings, which are ongoing, and with ongoing meetings with the closed school unit division of the bureau as well. We're always in very close contact with them. With any schools that have expressly stated their intent to close, we're working directly with school liaisons on the logistics of setting up workshops, working with other partners like the Department of Education, the accrediting bodies, and other schools as potential landing spots for students who are impacted by closures. That's a very strong part of our relationship with community colleges as well. We've been adding landing pages to our website for schools where we have information that they'll be closing as well. This was an effort as a result of some direct feedback that we've gotten where information about school closures were pushed out in other media outlets, and it was difficult to find the information on the Bureau's website about our awareness and work towards helping those students. And so historically the process has been, we've put that information up once we actually had the logistics of workshops ready to go, and then we put out the dates and locations. We're trying to be a little bit more proactive than that in developing individual web pages for each potential closure to document our progress towards and success ultimately in serving those students who are impacted. Lastly, on the closed school side, since the last time we've met, OSAR's facilitated 4 closed school outreach events, the Real Barbers College, the Hair Design Beauty Academy, and then we did 2 separate workshops during the closure of Coleman University, one for their day students and one for their night students as well. And so we continue to make progress there. We're continue to, in an overarching sense, doing training and, like I said, developing resources and fine-tuning our process and getting as much information as we can about potential closures as early as we can so we can be prepared. So with that said, we can transition to the handouts. Are there any questions on my general updates?
You mentioned that you're working on developing individual websites for schools and pending school closures. So there's a big one with Argosy and Art Institute. Correct. So is there plans to develop that website, or is it up already?
It's already up.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So it's up, and there's a link to it from a couple different pathways off the main OSAR page, but the easiest way is right under the What's New section.
Okay.
And it will be updated as we hit benchmarks. So when we schedule a workshop at a specific site, date and location, that would go up. And then there are other benchmarks in there as well. So
could you just maybe say a couple more sentences of the kind of outreach that you're planning to do to the students of those schools?
Sure. So what we would intend to do is set up workshops that will be able to accommodate both day and evening students, whatever schedule there may be, and to be able to provide plenty of advance notice is another thing. So we want to get student rosters as soon as we can with various types of student contact information. So then in addition to just generally pushing out the information through social media and our webpage, we actually want to directly contact those students that will be impacted and invite them to come to the workshop. So that's a big part of the early preparation. We also look at other potential schools in the geographic area that offer similar programs that could be potential landing spots. We coordinate with the community college's chancellor's office, with the local community college that may have similar programs as well, to make sure that there are adequate resources for students who are intending to transfer and complete their education in the program that they've originally enrolled in. And then the next step would be the deployment of resources, so training and planning the appropriate number of staff to be there to be able to accomplish both a large-scale, broad overall presentation, and then also time and ability to meet with those students individually while we're there as well. So resource deployment is a big issue as well. And just kind of getting as much information as we can about the school and who the right people are to talk to, make sure that the school has provided all of the documents that the student is required to have and entitled to help facilitate that next step. So their enrollment agreement, their transcript, their academic and financial records. All of that's all done through, and reminders, etc., through our communication with the liaison before we go on site. And then on site we go through all of their rights and opportunities.
So quick kudos to OSAR and April if she's in the crowd. I was able to attend to one of these closures and she did an amazing job. Obviously that was a tense situation because the students wanted to know what their options were, and one of those things. She did an amazing job really coordinating that whole thing and kind of calming the crowd, and everybody seemed very pleased by the end of it. So kudos to you and your team.
Scott, I just have a quick follow-up
Sure.
to that, and I apologize if this is going to be in the weeds or at the granular level. So I would also like to just add, I would love to attend one of those workshops if it's possible for advisory committee members to see that and kind of track how that works. But for example, when you talk about resources and staff, I mean, are you and your folks going down with laptops and there's a form that folks are filling out in real time where they're giving you all of their contact information. They are plugged into a spreadsheet. They become part of the communications that you provide. Are you, are you guys there filling things out with them as it comes now? Obviously.
Yeah. I appreciate that question.
Initial.
And obviously the dynamics of closures are different, situation to situation in terms of the size and the technology capacity infrastructure on site versus resources that we would need to bring in. But I would say the overarching comment that I would give to that is yes, it's very much an initial sort of everyone sort of in the largest room, capture everyone, giving them broad strokes information, just kind of, as Dr. Marion said, calming the room, explaining who we are, why we're there. There's very often sort of a vibe of, who are you, and are you somehow involved in the closure? So there's like kind of like a let's sort of establish the role and our presence, and that we're there to help you. And then from that point on, yes, the rest of the time there, the afternoon or evening or day that we're there, is very much roll up your sleeves, work with that student individually, work with the liaison at the school individually, make sure you've got all of your individual documents that you will need to file a STRIF claim if you intend to file a STRIF claim. We can show the STRIF video if we have the ability to do that we showed at the last meeting. Walk through the claim kind of step by step with them, going through all the individual documents they need. Connecting them with the U.S. Department of Education's website if they are going to be filing for a closed school discharge. I mean, all those things. The actual copying of records, etc. I mean, that's the type of environment that it is that we're trying to establish is not what in some cases has been done historically prior to OSAR. Here's the information about STRIF. Here's the STRIF claim. Get back on the airplane and hope they file STRIF claims. That's a very counter to the model that I've implemented. It's much more individualized in case management to their unique situation. So on to the handouts, and I think the way this is
I'm
working.
sorry, I do have
one
question in general. I haven't looked through it entirely, but I appreciate a lot more information now on your website. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. Where you have, I think the heading of this is something about the types of schools, and then you have public, private, and so forth and so on. If possible, when you talk about, under that you talk about, I think public schools, and then you talk about community colleges. If possible, it would be very nice to have a link there to the community college website or sites, so that people can go right from there and explore it if they want to. And the career schools description there talks about, they focus on technical or career or whatever. I think it would be helpful if there were, it's mentioned when you talk about community college, but if there were a little more emphasis there to make sure that people understand that
Sure.
you get technical and you can get technical and
Yep.
Career education there. Are just a couple of the things. And then I guess way back at the beginning, sort of wandered down a few links now, but where you're talking about the sort of the very initial about, types of colleges, what types of schools are there. Again, I think it's even before that, your very first link to that. It would be helpful if you had links there to community college information pages, not just, bureau or financial aid pages. Just a few comments. But I really appreciate that there is, increased information now about the things that one needs to compare.
I appreciate that. Yeah, they're a very close partner. I think for those new members who don't know my background, I worked in the community college chancellor's office for 10 years prior to coming here. very well aware of their increased resources and focus on the career technical education side. And I do have a CTE dean who's going to come and do a presentation for our staff. And like I said, I've got staff out there on a community college campus right now doing a resource fair. So I have very close communication with their public affairs people also, so we can definitely get all those links updated. And
it might even be helpful when you talk about the cost of different kind of schools to do an example and say this is an example. It doesn't represent all schools or whatever, but have some sense, because saying these schools may be less expensive, these more expensive, doesn't give me the sense that for many students in California, community college is free. In fact, I don't see that mentioned here, but I believe that's the case. So that would be an important thing to include also, and then just do a comparison, how much it might cost you for a sample career, depending on whether you went to a community college, a private college, a nonprofit, and the same thing for like a 4-year degree perhaps as well, something like that, just to give you a sense of the range you're talking about.
And you may as well include the wait list for community colleges for in-demand programs, and then the graduation rates, which are somewhere around 20%, and the fact that there is no placement assistance. There's a big difference.
I appreciate all the comments. Yep.
I would just be careful about getting into too much detail, because then it looks like we're advocating for different types of education versus others. And really what I think I would recommend to the staff is that you simply lay out factors that students should consider depending on what their career or educational goals are. Because I think you might get into some liability issues if you start trying to cast different types of programs versus other programs as better or worse, or it might be perceived that way, and I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that he characterize them as better or worse, but simply lay out the facts.
Perhaps maybe a reference to another third-party source, like the College Scorecard, published by the Department of Ed, or there are other online resources.
Yeah, I completely agree with that concern, because I think I think for schools, the purpose of OSAR is a laudable purpose. I mean, the idea is make sure that students are taken care of. Yep. But of course, there is concern that if you're going out and actively, sort of proactively talking about the different kinds of programs, if it appears that what you're really doing is trying to push students away from Bureau approved institutions, or you'd be better off the community college, that to Chris' point, that kind of brings up the idea of your purpose is not to guide students away from the schools the Bureau approves. So just being careful that that's not how it appears, I think, is very important.
And the opposite, that you're not purposely trying to steer students to Bureau.
No, I would say
so
today,
factual information.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, for example, that most students can go to community colleges free is a fact. It's just, you may need to explain who that applies to.
Mention that you get what you pay for.
Not necessarily.
You can have the last word.
We're good?
Yeah,
good. Okay, so...
Sorry. So this is maybe an awkward place to bring this up, but since we're on the BBP's website, there was something added to by SB 1192 that on the BPP's website, it had to include information about pending or final civil or criminal cases filed by any district attorney in the state, attorney generals of other states, also any final administrative actions taken by the Department of Education, this kind of information. I haven't seen it on the website anywhere, so I'm wondering if the Bureau has plans to put this on their website.
I'll look into it.
Okay.
Good.
Any other questions before Scott moves on?
I was going to go on to the handouts.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I think what's worked best in the past is to just kind of go through each of the handouts at sort of a high level, kind of what it's about, and then leave it open to any questions you might have. So the first item that you're looking at under our handouts is a quarterly report that is statutorily mandated that we are required to post on the internet for each fiscal quarter. So this covers the time period of April 1st through June 30th of this year. And it's separated through by the summary of our outreach activities on page 1, a number of students served section on the bottom of page 1, and then from there on it's a summary of the student services, services that we've provided to students over that quarter. And so what I would just say in broad strokes, looking at this, is that you can see that it's very heavy on outreach. It was a quarter we were doing a lot of activity, a lot of work through NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counseling Fairs. They have a series of fairs that run in the spring for primarily for high school juniors who are looking at their post-secondary options, and so we participated in that in a variety of capacities. And then just general closed school workshops and other partner workshops and our work with Department of Veteran Affairs. So I think if you look at comparatively to previous quarters, this is pretty heavy on the outreach side. On page 2, I would just note that you can see that the number of pending STRIF claims submitted to the Bureau prior to OSAR coming online on July 1, 2017 obviously continues to decrease and will, as of June 2018, we were down to 21 claims in which we were actively assisting students that were received prior to OSAR coming online. So eventually that number will be 0. The rest represents our assistance to students who filed STRIF claims or in filing STRIF claims, in gathering all their documents to determine and prove their eligibility, and any other information needed in order for us to summarize those services and then pass that file on to the Bureau to make the final decision on their eligibility. So that captures our assistance in working with those students individually in through the STRIF process. Questions on the quarterly report?
I have a question.
Sure.
The it's on page 3. The private loan
Yeah.
relief
Yeah.
figures. Are those figures? Are those students also eligible for part of that to be recovered from STRIF? And if so, are they also included in the numbers above?
Yes, yeah, so they could cross over into different categories. It's just isolating those particular claims in which part of that claim included a private loan. It could very well have cash out of pocket or other funding as well. Moving on to the next report, and I think the first thing I would point out on the STRIF, the Bureau's STRIF claims status report, is just for the benefit of having a more robust conversation. We generally do this quarterly as well, but because the data dump that was given to us was done as of July 18th, it didn't make a lot of sense to do it by fiscal year, so this includes the entire fiscal year of 17-18 plus the first 18 days of this fiscal year as well combined, so it's a little bit more reflective of kind of where we're at. So a couple of points of highlight there is we received essentially about a little under 400. The Bureau received a little under 400 STRIF claims in the last recently closed fiscal year, and paid out approximately $1.3 million in STRIF. We have about 425 claims or so that are currently in-house, which our staff are working with assisting students on the completion of those claims, and approximately 50 to be assigned. So, you know, it kind of goes hand in hand with my first comment. You know, it was a very heavy on the outreach side in this particular quarter, and so our numbers have gone up a little bit. If you look at this versus the previous meetings report, we a little bit more, a lot more claims came in this quarter, and we've got a lot more in the queue, but we are actively working on getting those all assigned as well. We also have one position that was vacated during this quarter as well, and we are close to refilling that position, so it had a little bit of an impact. You'll also notice the closing fund balance, again reflective of about a $1.3 million decrease from the close of the previous fiscal year. So the fund is, because as I think you all know, we're not currently collecting from the schools because we are over that $20 million threshold in the fund balance. Of course, the fund balance will just continue to go down as we pay out claims.
And the trigger is when it gets below 20, then we start collecting again, right?
So, thanks for this, and I think it's helpful to see some increase in activity related to this. I'm wondering if you have done any kind of evaluation of what you would see as kind of a number or a figure of potentially eligible students and how this compares. I think in what we've heard about some of the impacts and the numbers of folks who would be eligible compared to the numbers that we have claims for. And just kind of a broader question of like how you try to, you know, maintain some contact or be in touch with those students, right? So we're seeing 400, and is that number reflective of what we think are the eligible students out there who would be eligible for STRIF claims? You know, again, almost $3 million is great, and I think is moving in the right direction. But I just wonder if there's been any evaluation or how you would try to maybe balance that a little bit more closely with what is the likely reality of folks who are out there who would be eligible.
A good suggestion. I think it would be a tricky statistical analysis, but we haven't delved into it specifically. I think we could look at, you know, closures, the number of students impacted by the closure, or sort of account for what we know in terms of how many transferred versus those who could be STRIF eligible and haven't filed a STRIF claim. We could probably look at doing a data dive into that area, but it would be tricky, but I appreciate the recommendation and just the general thought behind capturing kind of where we're at versus where we could be. We certainly do everything we possibly can on the outreach side to capture everyone who would be STRIF eligible, and we're continuing to do that.
I just think it might be helpful for the office moving forward to see exactly, you know, it's great in some of the work that you've talked about in a short period of time, I think is laudable, and I think it would be helpful to really maybe try to understand the scope and magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of students and figure out how to be able to do that.
Appreciated.
On this page, you've got for 2017-18 claims paid 122, only one was ineligible, one was denied, 15 unable to contact. It kind of shows about a 90% pay rate. Or were there other ones that?
There's still others that are in the current claim status that we have. The Bureau has not made a decision on yet.
Okay.
That number could shift, but yeah, that's all that is documenting. And is those that are not. That have been received by the Bureau and are not currently being actively worked by OSAR staff. That was the end result of those claims in that category. Most of them have been approved.
You have a gut feel for how many claims you might pay this year? I mean, last year was 122. Are you more efficient, or we've got more things in the works? Is it going to be 200, 300? The average payment was just over 10 grand. So just kind of getting an idea of maybe the known exposure might be another $4 million.
Exactly. That's the first thing I was going to say. Is the sort of on the books potential liability would be about 4.6 million, just based on the claims that are currently in house but not yet finalized. But boy, predicting the future is really, really hard. I mean, we have a couple of potential very large closures that, you know, and others that may not. You know what I mean? It's just very hard to predict.
But just looking back at old large closures, Heald was a large one.
Yeah.
And you know, it wasn't all that. The hit wasn't that big.
Understood.
Because it's mainly Pell and federal loans.
Yep. We could definitely do a projection based on what we do know, but
you know, high low.
The over-under.
Over-under.
And I think going back to Sarah's point, it's hard to. There's a difference between who's attending when a school closes and who's eligible.
Exactly.
And so even if you could compare it against all students that were enrolled at the time of a closure, and then maybe you compare it against how many students attended your workshop. And that, you know, I mean, there's lots of different data points, but I think it would be really hard to figure out the impact because you don't know who's eligible until they apply. And a lot of them, to Dave's point, aren't eligible because they have all of their funds were kind of third-party kind of funds. So. But it would be great to kind of have a sense of.
I appreciate that, and I think my general takeaway is that we've been so focused on doing everything we possibly can to capture our initial reporting requirements to the legislature and the statutory requirements of these reports that's where sort of our efforts around data collection and data management, if you will, have been focused in year one. But what I'm hearing is moving forward, you like more in terms of projections and looking at the big picture and a little bit more comparative sort of pre-OSAR and then OSAR sort of data and trends. And we can definitely, look at that moving forward.
That'd be great. I think I could just clarify to Scott. I mean, obviously, if you're having those more case management style conversations moving forward with students, it might be able to give you a good idea of who you expect, who should be out there. I mean, we don't totally have to go back in time, although some of that I think might be helpful. But, obviously just trying to figure out, are we doing what we need to for folks who we think are most likely to be eligible.
Right.
Fair. Thank you. And then, if it's okay, just sort of lumping the last 4 handouts together. These were all sort of part of one request at the last advisory meeting to provide to you all of our outreach materials. And so what we've provided for you are sort of a generic PowerPoint presentation. Generally what we do and what I do when we're going out and speaking to groups is we sort of customize the PowerPoint based on who the audience is that we're speaking to and what the context of the meeting is. So what I've tried to do the best I can without giving you 25 different versions of the PowerPoint for the different audiences that we're speaking to is kind of merge together the most general sort of basic talking points that we're looking at when we're doing our outreach. So what we do is we generally have this PowerPoint presentation ready and loaded when we get there for an event, and then offer to give that to students as needed, or like yesterday, a lot of them were taking pictures of certain slides that were relevant to them on their phones, things like that. But essentially this would be a fairly tangible outreach piece of outreach material that we give to students. The second item is just a one-page flyer that we provide in various ways, electronically, in hard copy, at college fairs, at closed school events. It's on our website. As I mentioned, it's in the America Job Center one-stops and many other places. And then, again, just trying to be as comprehensively responsive to the request about everything that we give to students in OSAR sort of spaces. Obviously, in closed school workshops, we would provide students with the STRIF application, so we provided a copy of that for you, and also the closed school guide as well. So between these 4 items and the video that we showed you last time and the website content, that is pretty much to date everything that we're providing to students tangibly in terms of outreach. As I said, it's dynamic. It's continually being added to as we make partnerships, feedback like from Margaret about different links that should be on the website, etc. So this is definitely a snapshot in time. We're working on a Researching Colleges handbook would be another thing that's coming down the pike. So more web resources. But as of right now, this is what we provide to students per your request. That's all I had this morning.
A couple of questions. I appreciate all the work you're doing to try to get the word out to students. One of the issues I'd raised was the methods used to try to locate students you're unable to locate, and I suggested maybe trying to use some web resources.
Yep.
And I wondered what, if any, progress there's been on that.
Yep. So we have an account with LexisNexis. Staff has gone through individual training on the LexisNexis search. We're also using the National Loan Servicing Database as well as recommended. And not a ton of success to report to date, frankly. As I said, that was a good suggestion, and it was a suggestion to augment existing email, phone, other contact that we've had. And so I would say it's been limited, but we'll continue to use it and continue to look for other resources as well.
Thank you. The other thing that I had suggested was that when you get requests from students for transcripts and you respond to those, that you also include with that the STRIF form and information about STRIF. And I think that hadn't been implemented yet last time, and I wondered if has been a change in your process on that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Good reminders. So yes, I'll do better next time.
That's fine. That's fine. It's my job to try to remember and ask you again.
Had a lot of travel over the last couple days, and for you parents, today was first day of school this morning, so I'm doing the best I can.
Hey, it's my job too to remember to ask.
No, but we're definitely on top of it. We have added a couple different things. Number one, we've added some OSAR language. I believe it's already up. We've definitely done the ticket to add some OSAR language to the transcript request landing page on the Bureau's website. And so if that's not up yet, it will be up very shortly. We have implemented a process where our admin unit is scanning and uploading electronic copies of all of the transcript requests that come in and categorizing them and putting them in a shared drive so that OSAR staff can have access to them when those students do follow up. And yes, we're also putting the flyer in on those outgoing mailings as well.
But I think that maybe that's it. Thank you very much.
Well,
does anyone else have any questions for Scott? Scott?
Appreciate it.
So I have a suggestion. If everyone is on, Margaret.
This is not a question for Scott, but I wondered if we could treat the handouts he's provided like we are planning to do with the survey, that we will get back to Richie with comments and or at the next meeting ask for an update on any changes that might have resulted from the suggestions.
Sounds good. Okay, so I know that I've had a request for a bio break. So before we do that, public comment, and then you also need a bio break. Someone does, yes. So is there any public comment on what has been presented thus far? Okay, great. Then we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back in, let's say, I can't do this math, 5 of 12, and then we only have 2 agenda items left, so my suggestion is that we power through and then we'll close, what's the word? Adjourn, rather than taking a lunch break. So use your 15 minutes wisely. Everybody, the room is emptying.
Hello.
Don't take that personally. I'm sure everyone wants to hear about regulatory package updates. Okay, so everyone is back. So we are going to reconvene, and we will do item number 6, which is status updates relating to 4 different sets of regulations.
So this will be quick. So once again, agenda item A, out-of-state regulations. OAL approved the package except for some sections that we pulled out, which is 71399, which will go in effect October 1st, 2018, and then section 1398C that we're also doing some modifications for.
On that one, and Mina and I were talking about this prior to the meeting, is there an update on the status of unaccredited institutions outside of California being able to be registered?
As the law currently stands, I don't believe there's any changes. The legislative mandate at 94801.5 that creates the definition under, I believe it's sub A, that talks about the accreditation.
And that's for registration, you're required to be accredited and licensed in the state. So the Bureau interprets that to mean that those out-of-state institutions that are not either required to be registered in their state or licensed in their state and or not accredited would not fall into that requirement, the out-of-state schools.
And they would also have to pay into STRIF, correct?
They would not. The ones that are registered and
Right.
licensed in their state, they must be register and then pay into STRIF.
Got it.
So that the students would be able to be eligible for STRIF.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, I hate to just stealing your thunder here, but on this question. So if the law as it's written does not have a provision for a school that is out of state, that is a non-accredited institution, what is your position on those schools enrolling students in California if it is impossible for them to register?
Well, as I said before, we could talk about it offline and then we could put it on the next agenda item because it's really not related to the status of I know it's related to the subject area of the reg, but it's not on the status, so we'll talk more.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item B, English language programs. This package has been submitted to the department and to begin the approval process by both the department and agency, and we'll keep you up to date on that one. All right, agenda item C, verification for exempt status. It has been submitted to the department and agency and will be going before the OAL. Anything?
What was the, what's the change on, if you don't mind refreshing? Is it just an updated application?
Yes, it is. It updates based on the changes in the statute. 94874 has both added and removed different exemptions.
Okay.
Plus the 2-year requirement from 1192 was put into that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a complete updating based on statutory changes.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last one, agenda item D, which is compliance with laws and policy. This package has been noticed and submitted to our council for review. All right.
Just ask something quickly or make a comment. This is really helpful and I appreciate it. I'm wondering if it's possible, without adding too much work, to get a breakdown of some of the timeline related to each of these packages. I think it would be helpful to know how long they've been in existence and where they are in the process and how long that's taken. So for example, once something has been, sorry, am I repeating myself?
No. Oh. We're laughing because we kind of have that a similar feeling already as well.
I mean, if it would be possible to share that or in any presentation about regulations to, so at least, committee members can get an understanding of the time frame and
absolutely, let's add that too.
Yeah,
we'll start
that's a great idea.
With the November meeting.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide any kind of technical assistance questions about what exactly might be helpful just in terms of the process for folks who don't always live in.
Great
Absolutely.
idea.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That concludes my update.
Thank you. Newly confirmed chief. Any public comment on agenda item 6 before we move on? Seeing none. Item 7, and this was my request to have this added to the agenda. Did you have a report on this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So just as background, for those who have not been paying attention, there was a statutory law, a law that was passed that went into effect this past June, which requires that institutions provide students an annual update of their cumulative borrowing. But it is not in the bureau section of the law. It is in the sort of education section of the law. And so I had gotten a number of questions from my clients about, A, who do we ask questions to about this? We want to make sure we're doing it right. And then sort of my own personal question was, is this something that the Bureau is going to be looking to enforce? And so that was why I asked if we could have it on the agenda to discuss sort of how this new provision will be, whether it will be or not be kind of worked into the Bureau's oversight. So that was the reason for the question. And I will let you answer to the best you can anyway.
Okay, this is, it was AB 1178 passed last year. It now exists in the California Education Code as 69509.6. And it basically does require, beginning with this award year of 1819, an individualized letter sent out to all students, current students really, that contains 4 bullet points. It has can be sent either by postal or email. It has other requirements, but to the base requirement of its relation to the Bureau is it is a requirement of all post-secondary institutions except for the California community colleges. So it will be something that institutions under the Bureau will be required to do.
And that is only Bureau-approved institutions, not out-of-state registered institutions. Is that
That's correct. As far as our actions regarding the out-of-state institutions, we're limited by 94801.5 in our oversight of them.
How do you know these numbers off the top of your head like this? This is very impressive.
Comes with the territory.
So it is something that's required by the law. In terms of the Bureau's enforcement authority over it, it would fall outside of the Bureau's enforcement authority because under Education Code 94932, it says the Bureau shall determine an institution's compliance with the requirements of this chapter. And that section, when we've had these issues before, when they're not in the chapter, which is Chapter 8, 94800 through 94950, it's questionable whether there's any authority for the Bureau to actually enforce the provision. But it does apply to the private post-secondary schools.
Yes, and if I can continue and build and actually step back on the regulations, that compliance with laws and regulations is to fill in the missing link from minimum operating standards, the compliance with all applicable ordinances and laws. And once we pass that regulation, our enforcement capability will be expanded.
That is lawyer talk. Lawyers.
So who currently is in charge of enforcing this?
It currently falls under the financial aid provisions of post-secondary, so I would imagine that the California Student Aid Commission. Right.
The law enforcement agencies in the state could enforce it as well.
Does anyone have any questions about this one? Any public questions, public comment about this specific agenda item? You're not getting away that easy, Kent. Sorry.
Darn shucks.
Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Post-Secondary Schools. We need to back up a little bit on that last comment in terms of what regulation is the Bureau employing to bring into enforcement this provision? Is it a catch-all provision that you're using, or is it a specific regulation that relates to this?
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is currently in the works a regulation regarding the minimum operating standards. The law, Education Code 94885, says the Bureau shall adopt by regulation minimum operating standards for an institution that shall reasonably ensure that all of the following occur. And
Number 9.
the number 9 is the institution is maintained and operated in compliance with this chapter and all other applicable ordinances and laws. So the Bureau would need to do a regulation to make that specific to this section that's applicable, or any other laws that would be applicable to private post-secondary schools.
But that is not current.
That's not currently.
There's not currently anything that does that.
And it would be a regulation package open to public comment, subject to the Office of Administrative Law's review, substantive review for authority and necessity and everything else.
Yeah, I appreciate
Clarity.
that. Just for the record, and we've been down this road a couple times in the legislature as well, is sometimes a kind of disturbing pattern of taking general authority and applying it to very specific situations which don't seem to relate at all, either legally or even policy-wise. The Bureau's done that in a couple situations that I was involved with in the last couple years, where they essentially cited a school for doing something or not doing something, and then essentially applied a general, it's our general authority to do that. That's troubling on a consistent basis. I can understand how that might occur on a specific situation, but if it's a general policy to take general authority and start to apply it outside of specific regulatory content into other situations, that's troubling, and that's something that we would be concerned with. So I appreciate the fact that you are seeking to get a specific regulation that specifically addresses this education code section. Appreciate that. Thank you.
And just for my education, if you could send me any of those examples, that would be helpful just for me to know.
Not sure the confidentiality of the folks involved in that, if I'll have to speak to them first. I don't want to dredge up current school issues.
Create something.
For past resolutions, if you know what I mean.
Anything else, Mr. Johnson? Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns from the public? Any other questions from the panel? All right, then. Thank you very much. So the last item on the agenda is future agenda items. I wanted to add one for, I think we're really loading up November. Everyone prepare for a long day in November. One of the things that we haven't discussed at this meeting, and I'm not sure if we discussed in May, was an update on the financials as to the close of the last fiscal year, because one of the new fee structure with the new percentage, and then the change to from 045 to 055, and there was a lot of questions, I think probably in February, about what is the impact of this going to be? Is there going to be, once all the funds have been collected, where are we in the budget? And now that the fiscal year has ended, I think it would be valuable for us to see what was the ultimate collection. How many mains, how many branches, so that we just have a better sense of the universe of the schools that the Bureau is overseeing, as well as how much of an impact this raise in fees has. And I think it's also valuable because there is some authority, I think, in the statute to assess whether the 0.055 percentage is necessary, but it was really sort of impossible to tell before it went into effect, because the fiscal year where the 0.045 was being collected hadn't been completed yet. So I think it would be valuable to be able to kind of see the universe of the financials, so we have a better sense of what we've collected and how that compares to what we need. Any other future agenda items? Sarah, do you have one?
I do. This goes back to some of what Yvette touched on with regards to the work of the enforcement unit and their efforts with other entities. I think it would be helpful for the committee to have an update on the memorandums of understanding that the Bureau has entered into with other agencies, entities, private entities like the California Massage Therapy Council. The context for some of this comes from the legislature, members of the legislature, obviously hear from constituents who are concerned about students, and maybe it's the constituent themselves who feels like there was some harm from a school. The school, usually the case is that the school is not able to lead to viable employment or voluntary certification, as the case may be with massage therapy, or licensure in some schools. So I think for folks to be able to understand the relationship that the Bureau has with other entities, some are statutory, some are voluntary, and there are requirements for memorandums of understanding that have been in place for a while. There are, I think, probably outdated MOUs with some, so I think it would be helpful to just get an understanding of the status of those, what might occur, and it might provide the committee an opportunity to suggest additional formal relationships with other entities.
So let me make sure that I'm clear on what you're asking. So you want to know the status of all of our MOUs? Or is it there are certain few that you specifically have an interest in?
I think it'd be helpful to have a status of all the MOUs that the Bureau has entered into, to the degree that those can be shared. Obviously I'm not asking for any confidential enforcement, but with the status of the most recent memorandum with the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, it's probably outdated what's actually in print.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look into it.
Thank you.
I would have a suggestion that regarding, as we had a discussion earlier about the IT system, that's a multi-year project with could we add that to current agenda item number 5 as a standing category until completion?
Yeah. I had some items. One is I had asked that we be provided a sampling of complaints, a summary if you can't provide the actual language with redacted private information, particularly complaints that are included in the fraud, other, or the contractual quality of education or the incompetence, negligence, financial stability categories, as well as the those included in the closure categories of non-substantiated and non-jurisdictional referrals to other agencies. And for next, when it gets on the agenda, as far as I'm concerned, for the first time it gets on the agenda, it could be simply providing us that information, a report on it, or if we don't even need a report, we just need the documents. But then once we have the documents, I'd like there then be the opportunity to have some discussion on that, possibly. So I don't know if it's an agenda item until we actually get the documents. But that would be sort of a 1-2 step, get us the documents, and then, you know, put it on the agenda. And I think that we had talked about this before, and there was going to be some effort to look into that or whatever, but just make sure, let's get it on the agenda. And then another topic, which is kind of has various aspects. I would like a discussion of, I have raised this before also, that despite what seems to be good progress in the Bureau really taking on its functions after it was set up, which, you know, takes a long time to get an agency set up and the regulations in place and the staff hired and the hiring freezes out. But I'd like to have a discussion about what seems to me that certainly in the past anyway, the Bureau is not the lead agency in addressing major problems that other agencies such as the AGs or the Department of Education have been the ones to do that. And I'd like a discussion about why that is and whether that's still an issue. And if it isn't, why the Bureau thinks it isn't, and if it is, what needs to be done to address that. And sort of in relation to that, there was some comment earlier about, you know, needing more money, and so I'd like to have included in that discussion recommendations or some reporting from the Bureau as to how many more staff it could accommodate, how much that might be, and also because we're caught up on licensing applications, what about the possibility of shifting some staff so that we can catch up on the statutory requirement to do inspections that they're, with the current staff, even, you know, working as diligently as they are, we are going to be still way out of compliance for years to come. So I'd like, you know, a discussion of how we can get in compliance and what that will entail as far as whether it's changed procedures, whether it's, you know, more staff, more resources, shifting of staff, but you know, I guess a report from the Bureau and then the possibility for us to discuss that to see if we can consider what might be done. And another topic was I'd raised before my concerns about the way the OSAR office was being used, which I think, as I read the statute, it's supposed to be helping students apply for STRIF, among other things, not processing STRIF claims that have already been filed. And I think there was some thought by the legal staff that it was appropriate under the statute, so I'd like to have provided to us a legal analysis of that. And to the extent that they feel that that has something that has to be confidential, then, you know, an explanation of why, because, you know, that's something that may, if it really doesn't say what I think it does, then maybe that's something that we ought to think about for changing the statute. Because by having OSAR responsible for processing those claims, it reduces OSAR's, or it puts more burdens on OSAR so it has less of its time and resources to simply help students. So I'd like, you know, an explanation of that legal analysis. I think that was something we talked about and we were going to try to get, but let's put that on the agenda so that we actually have that set up and we're not violating any rules. And, oh, I'm sorry, in connection with my earlier question about what do we need to do to get the complaints and the inspections more current, one question that came up was about the possibility of having an office in Southern California so that people are not having to travel so much for the inspection, school inspections, and to include that as an aspect of that whole discussion and what it would take to do that, or what are the pros and cons of doing that. And I think it had been raised here today, what is the Bureau's use of the 120-day exception? And I'd like to have a report, I think, on when that has been used, the 120-day before closure, more than 120 days before closure for STRIF refunds, a report on whether that's been used, and if so, how often and when, and that kind of thing. And then finally, in the reporting about, which I thought was very helpful, about the different accrediting agencies that are showing up, there were huge bumps in WASC, which doesn't, as my recollection is, require outcomes, certainly not career placement outcomes. And in, I don't know how you say it, DEAC, the distance, DEAC, the Distance Education Accrediting Association, and we know that with distance education, it's a little more difficult to assess schools because there's no there. You're trying to figure out based on, you know, students at different locations from the school and so on. So I'd like some analysis, thought, report from the Bureau about what it has done to think about how it is going to address the increased use of those two accrediting agencies and whether that will have impact on issues that the Bureau needs to address. And the answer may be, no, it doesn't. But I'd like to, you know, at least have some discussion of what the Bureau has thought about in relation to those increasingly on the scene. And I think that's it. And all of those may be a little much for one meeting, so I understand if some of them are prioritized or not.
So we should probably plan for a multiple day meeting.
12-hour meeting. One other thing to add is just a quick update on the income share agreements, since that was one of the topics from the last meeting that we didn't address today. Any other future agenda items?
Can I just add on that, in connection with that, I'd be curious to hear the Bureau's view of how that fits in with statutory requirements, statutory and regulatory requirements. Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other public comment?
I'm sorry, can I just say one more thing? I really want to express how much I appreciate the increased detail and the thoroughness of the reports that we're getting from staff and the increased efforts to get things in place. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Agreed.
Thank you for saying that, Margaret. I really appreciate it. I know my team appreciates that too.
Okay, is there anything else from the public before we adjourn? All right. Well, we'll make up for the time we saved today in November, everybody. So unless there's any objection, I'll move to adjourn the meeting. Everybody cool with that? Okay, meeting adjourned. See you all in November.